So Sirui are one of those lens companies that have really dialed in their autofocus performance with the Aurora range. Now this is the full frame range. This is the 85mm lens. I've got the brand new 35mm f1.4 and we're going to be putting it up against the G Master f1.4 because that's the fastest 35mm autofocus lens that I've owned. And Sirui are really targeting that lens and producing something that's pretty much the same for a fraction of the cost. Now here it is, the Sirui 35mm f1.4 Aurora lens right next to the G Master 35 f1.4. Which one is going to take the cake? So at the time of recording this video, the Sirui 35 f1.4 will be released at $549 USD, whereas the Sony 35mm GM will come in at $1,599 US. That is almost 3 times the price of the Sirui lens, so definitely take that into consideration this whole video. So when it comes to the build of these, I mean, they're practically the same. They've both got the autofocus and manual focus switch. They've both got a custom button. They've both got the clickable or non-clickable aperture ring. But one thing that the Sirui has that the G Master doesn't have is locking that iris ring. Now, pretty much all the newer G Masters have that iris lock, and it definitely is a feature that I absolutely love because majority of the time when I'm using autofocus lenses, I don't touch the aperture ring at all. And sometimes you can accidentally knock it, and when you do knock it, it goes from auto to f16. And essentially that would be identical to the Sirui lens because you have the auto and then it goes to f16. But essentially all you need to do is hit that iris lock and it will lock that iris so you don't accidentally bump it. Now, when it comes to the focus ring on both of these, I mean, they are fantastically smooth. There isn't any noise coming from this manual focus ring, which is really nice because I know there's a lot of third-party companies that just have like a bit of a grinding sound when it comes to that manual focus ring, but it does seem to be a little bit more stiffer than the G Master. But I don't know if that's because my G Master is relatively old now. I've had this for a few years now, but I mean, they're both pretty much the same. Now, one key difference between both of these lenses is that front filter thread. The GM has a 67mm front filter thread, whereas the Sirui has a 62mm front filter thread, which is really strange because the 85 Aurora lens had the 67, but this one has the 62. I don't know why they've added the 62mm right there, whether that's just to make the front a little bit smaller, I'm not sure, but it would have been nice to see a 67 so it would be consistent in that Aurora range. Because all my ND filters are generally an 82mm front filter thread, but I do have adapters in those kits that go to 67. So I do have to use a step up ring on this to a 67, and then I can use that 67 front filter thread. So let's have a look at the image quality with the Sirui 35mm lens. Going directly into the center, you can see wide open at f1.4, it is absolutely tack sharp. And even if you go out to the corners, it still is relatively sharp and holds really good contrast. And pretty much if you just continuously stop it down, it gets crazy sharp and really high contrast. And you'll also start to see less vignetting in the corners as well. And the Sony lens is practically the same. Wide open at f1.4, you can actually see it's really sharp in the center. You go out to the corners, it's also nice and sharp. It does seem a little bit sharper than the Sirui lens, and also the distortion seems very similar between the two lenses. Now, the Sirui lens does seem just a touch warmer in comparison to the Sony lens. And if we have a look at the longitudinal chromatic aberrations, I mean, there is a little bit with the Sirui, wide open at f1.4, but if you do stop it down to f2, it does seem to go away quite a lot. And it's pretty much the same story with the Sony lens. And this is where you'll notice the chromatic aberrations the most when you zoom in on high contrasting edges. Both the Sony and the Sirui do display chromatic aberration, but not crazy amounts. If you're pixel peeping, they are very close, pretty much the same. So as you can see by the image chart, these lenses are practically identical, which is absolutely phenomenal if you're going to be comparing an autofocus third-party lens against a G Master lens. G Master is meant to be the best of the best when it comes to the Sony range, and Sirui have done an incredible job to produce something very similar for literally the fraction of the price. Okay, autofocus. We do have to talk about that when it comes to the performance, and obviously it's a third-party lens and generally they don't perform as well as native Sony lenses, but to my surprise, it performs very similar. Now, when it comes to touch focus, you can see here that the Sirui lens performs perfectly fine when it comes to touch focus, but the Sony lens does seem like it touch focuses maybe just a fraction faster, but we're talking about a fraction. It's crazy fast between both of these and crazy similar. And I've put these in a few different situations and it does seem like it's pretty much the same as a Sony lens. And anecdotally, using it in a couple of shoots now, the autofocus was performed perfectly fine. Now this is paired with the new Sony FX2, so it is the best Sony autofocusing system right now, but I'm super happy with the performance of this lens. And yes, it does also come in the L mount, so you can use it with all your brand new Panasonic cameras, but it definitely does depend on obviously which Panasonic camera you're going to be pairing this with. So this is not a scientific autofocus test by any means, but I am using the Lumix S5 with the Sirui 35mm on it, and I mean, it performs perfectly fine. It obviously, like I said, it does depend on what camera you're actually going to be putting this in, but this has the new phase detection autofocus in that Lumix range. But then you have, you know, the S1 II, the S1 IIe, and the S1 R2 as well, which have the best Lumix autofocus system. So it's going to work perfectly fine with those cameras, just like this. So this test with the Sirui lens, we've got to have a look at the linear focusing. And you can see here, when it comes to pulling from close to far, you actually have to do a fair few pulls when it comes to that focal point. Now, pulling fast and then going back slowly, we can see if it goes back into the same spot, focused on the lens. And you can actually see here that it's slightly off. So the focus isn't linear. If you pull fast, then pull slow, it may change position. So it may be hard to do repeatable pulls. But when it comes to the Sony lens, this is where it is very easy to do repeatable pulls. And that focus pull is a lot shorter than what it is on the Sirui. Whether that's a pro or a con, it's purely dependent on you. But I actually prefer how the Sony sort of focuses. It's a lot easier to get that focal point, and you can still dial it in, even though the focus throw is quite short. Now, focus breathing, that is one major issue that Sony had with their 35 G Master lens. This has a ton of focus breathing, but luckily some of the newer Sony cameras have focus breathing compensation. So essentially that just crops in on the image, and then when you actually focus from close to far, you don't have that breathing issue that could be distracting for some people in video. And you can definitely see in these side-by-sides that the Sony lens has far more breathing than the Sirui lens. That the Sirui lens isn't absolutely perfect when it comes to focus breathing, but it definitely isn't as much as the Sony G Master. So if that's something that you care about, then obviously the Sirui is better than the Sony lens. So what's the bokeh shape like between both of these lenses? So when it comes to the bokeh shape, the Sirui does seem a lot more spherical than the Sony lens does, but it does seem like there is a little bit of onion ringing inside the bokeh shape, whereas the Sony lens seems to be relatively clean. And if you go out to the edges, they both seem like they do cat eye when it comes to that bokeh shape. They're not as spherical as they were in the center, but overall with the bokeh shape, it really is personal preference here. So when it comes to the flares, what's the difference between these two lenses? So judging by the side-by-sides here, you can see that the Sirui does flare just a little bit more. It goes just a touch more. It seems like the Sony lens is a little cleaner, but if you don't like any of these kind of flaring artifacts, then obviously just use the included lens hood. So look, overall, it's really hard not to choose the Sirui lens because of the price. The value of this is just absolutely insane in terms of, you know, the image quality, in terms of the specs that you actually get in this thing. It's just incredible that Sirui can actually do this literally just a fraction of the price of the Sony lens. So in all honesty, it just really comes down to what budget you're working with, but obviously for that price, I mean, the Sirui lens is an incredible purchase. So anyway, my friends, I will put the link in the description below for obviously both of these lenses. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.